Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth of the 2021 Museo ng Kaalamang Katutubo lecture series. My name is Corazon Alvina. On behalf of Muscat, permit me to express the hope that you are all well, safe and sound during these times. With pleasure, we welcome this afternoon to Muscat's podium architect Michael or Mico Manalo, a specialist in the conservation of the built environment. He will explain to us how autochthonous building solutions draw heavily from the surrounding environment. He writes, and I quote, "Materials are sourced in close proximity to a settlement, and building technologies respond to the settlement's geographical location and climate. While the cultural expressions crystallized in each type of architecture may be different, commonalities exist in how these are adapted to specific environments, just as similar solutions are to be found even outside the Philippine archipelago." Unquote. But he will essay more of that later, and later as well, we shall have a more proper introduction of our speaker. In the meanwhile, another introduction might be in order. May I introduce, with your indulgence, Muscat, the Museo ng Kaalamang Katutubo, a foundation involved in museum development, studying and safeguarding material culture and cultural education, with UNILAB as its main benefactor. The Museo ng Kaalamang Katutubo is a diligent student of Philippine culture, as it is a committed champion of Philippine inherited and transmitted kaalaman. Muscat's mission and vision are about knowledge, ancestral and contemporary, across time in ethno-linguistic groups. Muscat is a generous sharer. It endeavors to provide opportunities through which the public can discover, recuperate, understand, and appreciate and celebrate the complex layers of Filipino kaalaman. Its public programs and projects resonate too and are animated by the extraordinary features of Philippine tangible and intangible heritage. These activities will be animated conversations, interactive, infused, and enlivened with the remarkable elements of Philippine cultures. Muscat is also a diligent custodian of material culture and tends to research and curatorship. Public programs such as this lecture series and publications, where, for both, Muscat engages and collaborates with acknowledged subject matter experts. We also deal with collections management, principally at this time, conservation and registration. Muscat searches for the inspiration behind processes that bring forth the most exquisite textile, the handsomest weapon, astonishing basketry. It is sensitive to the physicality and materiality of the objects themselves, to steer not only the study of forms and technology, but also the appropriate conservation strategy for the well-being of cultural objects. Muscat respects the bonds between humans and their environment and the balance that must be maintained between them. Muscat is animated by an understanding that kaalaman is inherited and transmitted. It recognizes and rejoices in the aesthetic integrity and creative philosophy, in the outstanding skills and the commitment of our artists. It acknowledges the diwa, spiritual sense and essence in kaalaman. Muscat's resolve is to encourage, inspirit, and invigorate pride, aspiration, admiration, and affection for Kaalamang Katutubo, as indeed for and in all things Philippine. As promised, we will listen to a brief sketch of Mico, as architect Michael Manalo is better or more affectionately known. May I ask Muscat colleague Raymond Santiago to do that? Raymond?
Thank you, Ms. Cora, and good afternoon. Allow me to introduce our speaker. Architect Michael Mico Manalo is a practicing professional specializing in conservation of built heritage. He is a lecturer at the Cultural Heritage Studies program of the UST Graduate School. He is also a member of the National Committee on Monuments and Sites of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. He is currently Commissioner for Cultural Heritage of the NCCA. Now, without further ado, let me give the virtual floor to Architect Mico.
Thanks so much, Raymond and Mom Cora. Just as a disclaimer, what we're going to be seeing now are, it is Katutubo building solutions, no? But maybe just to set the tone for this, I'm an architect, and I really specialize in conservation of the built environment. So I'll try to approach this from the point of view of an architect. Sometimes a lot of us are going to be expecting, like for example, the worldview of people as reflected in the architecture. We're going to touch a little bit on that, but not exactly. So as the secondary title shows, how knowing the environment shaped our local architecture. So it's really more of looking into the environment. Now, what are the parts of this lecture? First of all, we'll try to see why we're going to look back. Why do we look back at things? And then we're going to look at the environment. Of course, this is the protagonist of the lecture. And then the other protagonist is also the responses, so of cultures and of societies as seen in their architectures. And then as an epilogue, we're going to look at, we're going to answer the question, is there a future for traditional architecture in the Philippines? It's an interesting question, but it's a question that knows no ends as far as answers are concerned. So it's like asking, about Philippine identity and all of that. No, we will never finish. So this is just a very brief epilogue. So first up, why look back at traditional architecture? I've put several bullets here. No, so you're looking at identity. So whether it be your identity as Filipinos collectively, or your identity within a specific group. For example, in the photo, you have a highland house from Luzon, no, from the Cordilleras. So if you are somebody from this particular group, then I'd like to know more about myself, right? And I'd like to research more about myself. I'd like to know why my architecture, why my houses are like this, why I live like this, no? So architecture then becomes a cultural manifestation, and a lot of us who are involved in the conservation of architecture, we do a lot of research and documentation, no? So sometimes we do a lot of field work, and this is very, very, very enjoyable, no? So you go and spend time in these environments. So you get to observe the architecture, and you get to also observe the environment, the natural environment, and also the cultural environment. No, so these are things that have shaped these architectures, and then you work towards their preservation. So I know it's a little bit complex, but later on we're going to sort of have a very short discussion on this aspect of preservation, no? Or of conservation, because it's a very broad topic, and it probably deserves another lecture or two. Some of the one of the main sources of information is this one, Folk Architecture by Perez Encarnacion and Dacanay. This is a wonderful book, and I would really say that this is one of the main sources, no, for the study of folk architecture, of traditional architecture in the Philippines, unless you would want to go and take a look at other books, like, for example, by Harold Conklin or by William Henry Scott. There are a lot of dispersed materials, but then this book puts together a lot of these known sources and just has a very masterful overview. On the right side is the International Committee for the International Council on Monuments and Sites, that's ICOMOS. It has a committee on vernacular architecture. And this is where traditional architecture also falls into. So if you would like to know more about the world's traditional architectures, then maybe you can also try to access the ICOMOS CF webpage, or try to become members of ICOMOS and of ICOMOS CF. Now, if we open this book, Folk Architecture, we'll find this really wonderful amount of data. No, so it's pictorial data, and it's also the narratives. But what is lovely is that there are also plans and drawings. Some of them very, very detailed. So this is really a treasure for those who seek to study more about traditional architecture in the Philippines, no? And those who want to know more about their identity through the traditional architectures of the Philippines. So another thing that we try to see is aesthetics, no? So why look back at traditional architecture? For I live a double life. So if I'm not the conservator of architecture, I also am a designer. I'm an architect. So I do new architecture. So I also see traditional architecture as a source for modern design. So for some people, they see this also as a projection of their culture, or if they're abroad, of their ethnicity, especially if you're in places like the United States. So later on, we'll show, we'll take a look at how this is done. No, but probably as another source book that illustrates this looking back to look into the aesthetics is this one. This is by the Department of Trade and Industry. No, the Design Center of the Philippines has this book. A bulk of which was also researched by Lord Calma. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book, Philippine Ethnic Patterns Design Source Book. No? So it also has, among other things, architecture embedded into its content. So here we have a page from that book that shows you a panolong, a Maranao panolong with the clear designs and the Naga motif. No? And then we have other books like Rara. This is by Habi, Habi Foundation. And although it says that this is the art and tradition of mat weaving in the Philippines, mat weaving can never be, or weaving per se, cannot be disassociated from traditional architectures in the Philippines. So we do have an excerpt from that book. So we have this photo of a man putting together an anahaw roof. So it says here, under a canopy of sasa or nipa, or in this case, anahaw leaves. So it just tells you that Filipinos also love pattern, and this pattern is also evident in the architectures that we have produced in these islands. So another thing that we like to see is sustainability principles. So we look back at traditional architecture to see sustainability principles for architecture. So we take a look, how is it suitable to our environments, and how does it become efficient as a consequence? I know that in the background of your screen there is there's a drawing of a bahay na bato, and we all know that the bahay na bato, a lot of its components of its architectural elements are also lifted from traditional architecture. So this particular illustration comes from the book of Martin Tino and Fernando Cialcita, Philippine Ancestral Houses. But I'd like to also issue a disclaimer that a lot of the photos in this book come from the book Folk Architecture that I showed you earlier. So let's look at the environment, so climate. We're talking about temperature, we're talking about humidity. It's funny because earlier in this session, in the background, everybody was talking about rain and how it affects internet signal. So I heard questions like, "Is it raining in your area?" Right? Because you might lose your internet signal, and they were saying that, okay, if it's raining where you are, then the rain will come to our area because we're right in the path of the wind. So it's things like these that actually is very useful to somebody from, let's say, 100, 200, 300 years ago, that you don't have a smartphone, you don't have internet to tell you if it's raining today or whatever, right? Of your environment. And some people can actually smell if there's rain coming in, or if it's too humid or something like that. But what we mean to say in this lecture is that all of this would play a role in shaping the traditional architecture of the Philippines. So temperature and humidity, as part of the climate, um, they are also major factors in determining which solutions to take. No, then there's wind and rain. So we were talking about that earlier, right? Is it going to rain? Is it raining in your area? Is the rain coming to my area? But then we also think, how much rain is going to fall in my area, or how much wind am I going to have? I have to build to be able to shelter myself from this wind and from this rain, right? So I have to think of solutions on how to effectively isolate myself from all of these. So there is also water. And this is the most important thing, right? So we were talking about, remember, we were talking about wind and rain. And then the other slide, we were talking about humidity and temperature. Humidity has water, rain, of course, has water. And if you're looking at this picture in front of you, it's all full of water, right? So if we start from the bottom, there is groundwater right there. So groundwater is right underneath our feet. It's inside, it's within the ground. No? And then you have bodies of water that are apparent to us, right? Like the sea, the river, or the lake that we have. No? But then there's also condensation. No? There's evaporation of water, and then there's condensation, right? And then there's that rain that falls. So you have water in this area, you have water in this area, and then you have water underneath. So there's just water all around us. So water is a very big factor in determining what to do in our architecture. And then there are also the geological processes. What are these geological processes, right? So here we see that well, basically there's that thing called plates, right? And the Earth has all of these tectonic plates, and that will also sort of dictate if there are more earthquakes in your area based on the location of fault lines and of tectonic plates, right? And then here you have the volcanic activity and magma underneath. So all of this would have repercussions, of course, on our architecture. Why? Because they shape your geological formations. They also tell you if you have stones that you can use for building, right? Or if you have to react to earthquakes because you are in an area that is prone to earthquakes. As saying earlier, something about if the geological processes would beget like stones in your area. Now, that's talking about available materials in your area. Here in the photo, we have a beautiful canopy of green. And this is something that is shared almost all throughout the Philippines. The presence of forests, the presence of these mighty trees, right? And it seemed as if we just had this uh, this um, uh, this appetite for the use of wood, right? And that we 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 just thought that this was a resource that would never end, but of course it would, right? I'm now going to just show you some of the responses. No, I don't want to group the responses into groups of people. No, not really. We'll just try to make a more general grouping of these responses, so that the elements are much more obvious, right? It's the elements and not the group of people. So um, we can say that traditional constructions uh, provide basic shelter through two major things, right? So you do have isolation, uh, and you can isolate uh, through space, and you can isolate through material and technology. And I think that's where it's going to become a little bit more interesting, right? How material and technology is used to isolate, but uh, not completely isolate something. We'll talk about that later. And then you do have the fenestrations, of course, the openings. How does one get in and out of the house? How does one admit more air, more sunlight into the house, et cetera, et cetera? So we have this first element for isolation, which is your stilts, right? So it's isolation from the ground by means of space. So you're creating that separation by space from the ground. So here in the photo, you have a bahay kubo with stilts here, and they're pretty tall. I'm assuming these are Americans posed in front of a bahay kubo, and normally they can be pretty tall. So you're looking at something like a meter and a half of distance from the ground to the floor of the house. Why do they have to do that? It's because the damp is something that you have to prevent from entering into your house, right? So if people build directly on the ground, then they would be experiencing damp, right? So it's water that is always in the ground and rising up, producing this damp within a room, especially that it's if it's enclosed. It's something that maybe in Tagalog we can say kulob, right? So sometimes you enter into a room that's been sealed off for quite some time, and then you have this sensation that it's kulob. It does have that damp in the room. So a lot of the traditionally constructed homes are distanced from that damp by means of stilts, right? But some of them are distanced by tree stumps. So you have a typical Mandaya house, such as this one. This is amazing. This is also from that book, folk architecture. Um, and this photo just strikes me as really, really amazing. You see this magnificent tree stump becoming one of the legs of that house. So it's very important for us to realize this, right? That there is that need to anchor your house firmly on the ground. So the Mandaya would do that probably by supplementing it with one tree stump, right? So in some cultures, it's just putting the posts up, but for the Mandaya, it has to be a tree stump because the tree stump is just so firmly rooted to the ground, right? Some highland types, like this one from Sagada, seem to be fully enclosed from the ground up, right? So you're looking at this photo and you see this magnificent roof, and underneath that, you have an enclosure made of planks, right? And then it's directly on the ground. But if we do make a slice through, and this is again from Folk Architecture in the Philippines, the book, if we make a slice through that house, you can actually see that there is still that space, right, between the ground and areas for living, right, or areas for sleeping. So you find the bed still distanced from the ground, and some of those areas that are directly on the ground are used as storage, a chicken coop or something, right? But the more important parts are actually distanced from the ground. They're actually still raised because the ground still has that damp. But you have this magnificent roof. Later on, we'll discuss that. Uh, well, you also have stilts where there is no ground, but lots of water. So these are houses in the Sulu Sea. Obviously, if you want to live on water, you'll have to be on stilts. This one has a very nice. Uh, I mean, if you look at it when the tide is very low and the water becomes very shallow, it's so easy to actually walk on the sand. So if that's the case, you're thinking, how am I going to access my house, right? So for the Tausug, if they are in the coastal areas, the access would be via a series of catwalks perched on poles, right? So this would be linking one house to the other, or one house to the land actually in front of them. Or in the case of lowland bahay kubos with bamboo, it does have bamboo stairs to access a porch before entering the house. So the stilts would actually tell you that you will need to have a means to access the house, because it's actually a walk up, in other words, right? So you're not just walking horizontally into like either a space or through a door or something like that, but you do have to have a means to access the house. So in the case of probably the Highland variants, you'd have a ladder to access the house. So from these stilts emerge the framing of traditionally constructed houses, right? So this is very important. You have a frame, and on this frame, you will be able to develop everything. I mean, your entire universe inside this house, right? Whether it be something that you use, like a bed, or something you will use for storage or a shelf, right? Something you will use for hanging, right? Hanging things. So all of these would be developed around this frame, but also constructed systems would be developed along this frame. So even, for example, in the Maranao Torogan, it's still based on a frame, right? So in this case, it's a frame perched on top of these really huge, like parts of a tree trunk, right? And then you would have the posts going up, and then everything would be connected to these posts, right? So in this case, it's sort of like a post and lintel construction. It's very oriental in a way. And then from this post and lintel, they will have the rafter connected, right? So this is a very Asian, very oriental manner of construction, right? And then later on during the colonial period, a lot of these systems will be replaced by something that is not based anymore on like this post and lintel kind of development. And you would actually have an armature, a roof truss system. So it's actually going to be very different already. So this frame also allows for better flexibility during a severe storm or an earthquake. How does that happen? So if you do have a severe storm, um, there would be wind pushing from all directions, right? And if you do have a very flexible frame, the frame will just rock to and fro, the same manner as it will do during an earthquake. So with every movement of the earth, the entire construction will just rock to and fro. And hardly will it fall, unless probably the wind is really extremely very strong, right? So also part of the environment is looking at the available materials. So here we have thickly forested areas that give way to houses with heavy usage of timber. So this is something that is sort of like a common element in Filipino traditional architecture, and we're always looking at houses that use timber, right? But later on, we'll see houses that don't have a lot of that timber, right? They don't have access to timber anymore. So, for example, here, Mindanao's forests produced an architecture that celebrated its wealth in timber, right? So you have this Tausug house, and you can see the planks that are used for the walls. And these are really amazingly wide planks. So you see a person right there, right? And you can see how wide the planks are. And also you see timber being used for the posts of the house, right? And in Mindanao, still in Mindanao, you have the Torogan, which is perhaps the pinnacle of timber usage in this region, right? So you can see right before you. This is interesting. So the the one who uploaded this photo found it as a postcard and was asking around where in the world is this, thinking that it would probably have been in the Nordic areas, right? And then somebody had told him, no, it's a Torogan from the Philippines, right? So it looked like all these stave constructions in that area, but no, it's a Torogan from here, right? So here you have. Why do we say that this is the pinnacle of timber usage? Because you actually have a lot of these elements, whether hewn, sawn, or even carved. So everything, all of this is crystallized in one construction, right? And all of this is developed on a base of wood. And it wouldn't have been possible if not for the wealth of woods in this area, Mindanao. So you see here a fantastic photo. This is again from from Folk Architecture, the book. And you can see how huge this post is that supports this torogan, right? But you do also notice that this post is resting on these circular stones. And they also provide a means of like it's like a response to an earthquake, because every time the earth would shake, the house would just gently move back and forth, since it is perched literally on these stones. So stones and these huge chunks of wood, they're all found in one area, right? So also on these posts, rat guards can be built into. So you have these rat guards that keep unwanted pests out. So for those who aren't familiar with these rat guards, the rats would go up this area and they are blocked by these rat guards. So they just go back down, right? But as you can see, they're also like these, they still also keep that silhouette of like tree trunks with roots firmly on the ground. Here we have a lowland kubo. The other hand, that doesn't have access to premium woods, right? So what about these places, these lowlands that have already been developed for agriculture, and they have already been cleared for agricultural purposes, and there are no more forests. So what do they use since they don't have those premium woods, right? So here we have bamboo and other materials that they can use. So here we see a bamboo house with the house frame and walls of bamboo. So whether it be bamboo poles or split bamboo for the walls and for the floors. So speaking of floors, here we have like strips of bamboo that are used to make a floor that takes in air through its gaps. So you do have those slats, right, with those spaces that admit air through them. So you can just imagine you isolated yourself, right? You raised your house so that you wouldn't have the damp underneath. But then that space underneath, the silong, right, that we call in Tagalog, that will also have air circulating under it. And that air also permeates into the house. It goes into the house via these slats on the floors, right? So there is also a very big need to protect yourself from that air going through. I mean, air is good, but not all the time, not 24/7. So a lot of in a lot of cases, people would use the mats, right? Unroll the mats, put them on the floors, and that would be the most comfortable place to sleep because the mats still have these perforations, right? So they're not that big anymore, those perforations, but they would still admit some air through those perforations and through the slats of the floor. So what are we looking at here? It's interesting because we're really looking at a system where the house, remember earlier I was telling you that you have to isolate yourself? In this case, you're not just isolating yourself anymore. You're actually allowing everything to breathe. So it is a structure that actually breathes, right? I don't know if there are any people in our audience that does cycling, right? I like to ride a bike, and I like to ride a bike even when it's raining. And I would love to have protection from the rain. So there are a lot of products out there that offer protection, but they keep the rain out, but they also keep your sweat in. So you're looking for a product that keeps the rain out, but allows the sweat to go through it also. This is the principle of these houses, right? So they take in air, but then they shield you from the elements, right? From the heat of the sun and also from like rain, right? Here we have a fantastic floor of Bruno. So the entire floor of Bruno can actually be rolled and taken to the river for cleaning and for maintenance. Um, Here's a magnificent house from Holo. Here you can see, well, this isn't a very humble home anymore, judging by the textiles that you see on the wall and also the mats that you see on the floor in the areas where they sleep, right? So this is what we're looking at. Remember earlier, I was talking to you about this entire house being able to breathe. So how does it breathe? earlier we've already said that it would breathe through the floor. It would also breathe through some of the perforations on the walls. Not a lot, because these are walls, but look at the ceiling. So these ceilings, they're made of nipa, but they still have gaps between them. So these nipa roofs would actually function more like shingles. So you do have the nipa shingles, but they still do have gaps. And through those gaps, the warm air would escape, right? Or if there's cool air outside, it can go in, vice versa, right? So it's a house that is, on the one hand, it can isolate, but on the other hand, it can still keep air going through it, can still keep air circulating. So it is a very, very well ventilated house, in other words, right? Um, so again, we're looking at elements from houses that don't have much access to wood, and you'd have like these sawale patterns or amakan, uh, as they call in the Visayas, right? So you have this wealth of expression in one element that is used for like walls and also ceiling covering. So it's fantastic when something actually becomes a means of expression for the owner of a house or for people in general, right? So we were talking about the roofs. So you're looking at a roof of Kogon. You're looking at a roof of Anahaw, which has this beautiful pattern, right? So it all creates all of these patterns, and then you have these uh, um, shingles being made out of nipa. Perhaps one of the most recognizable roof forms is that of the binuron of the Isneg. This is just for me personally. There are much more commanding roof forms, but this for me is something that tells you that looking at one's environment, looking at the available materials, can actually give you something which is very, very beautiful, and at the same time very useful in shielding oneself from the elements, right? So the binuron has all of these layers of bamboo shingles that just keep it from the sun and the rain, right? But again, air can circulate still, right? Because when you lay down these bamboo shingles, there would still be some spaces left for air to filter through. Fenestrations, openings, or the lack of, right? So this is a house from Mayoyao, and it really looks like it doesn't have any openings, right? Why is that? Because it's going to be too cold to have openings. It's going to be too cold in this area of the Philippines. So you see that most of the house is conveniently tucked into the structure of the roof, right? And if you go inside, it's this very, very cozy space. And you see the reeds just being wrapped around the entire house. And you also see how the frame is used to develop systems for hanging and systems for storage, right? And then these raised areas that are also used for sleeping. So it is a very comfortable space. I've actually tried staying in one, and I did have a good night's sleep. And outside, yes, it can become very, very cold. And inside, you just have that warmth in the interior space. But then you have these, right? Uh, lowland bahay kubos with sliding windows that can actually be pushed out with a tukod, right? So in the photo, you can see that the windows can actually slide on a bamboo track, right? So it's suspended, it's sort of hooked on to this bamboo track. And you see the guy right here. So he's peeking through. He had managed to just push out one of the panels, right? And peek through. And this lady, probably his wife or his daughter with the son. Oh no, this is a family. So wife, husband, and baby. So you see them peeking through the a bigger opening, right? So they can slide, or if there is if there's a lot of rain, but not enough that can actually go into your house, you can actually use it as an awning, right? So it can be pushed out, and then with a another stick or a tukod, it can be set in place. Okay, so this is the question that we had earlier, right? Is there a future for all of this? So we were talking about this. No matter where we are, we would always come face to face with something that is self-constructed or autochthonous construction, right? Whether you're in Luzon, Visayas, or Mindanao, you would always have a traditional house. But is there a future for the traditional Filipino house? So for those points, right, that deal with sustainable design principles and aesthetics, probably yes, as evidenced by the works of Filipino architects such as Bobby Banyosa, such as Ning Encarnacion, who is a big supporter of architecture in bamboo, and also a lot of other architects, right? For example, this one is by Manny Miñana. And you see how all of the principles, or not all of the principles, some of the principles, right, of shade, of layers, of windows, right, and that control of interior and exterior space. So some of those make it into modern architecture of today, and that's why we're saying that for traditional architecture to be a benchmark for aesthetics or for sustainable design principles, then it is a yes, right? We're no stranger to this because it's always evolved into something. Before all of these modern houses, you do have these bahay na bato, as we were discussing earlier. So the houses from the Spanish period also had developed systems that are akin to traditional architectural systems, right? Sliding windows, and the control of light and ventilation. So, like for example, here the windows can close and the ventanillas can open, and a lot of them would also have inside what's this, perforations on the walls that can transmit air from one enclosed space to another. So it is also a house that can breathe, right? Albeit made of current materials. Like, for example, tiles were readily used at that time. And then you already have hewn stone or bricks, something like that. And a lot of times these materials would be transported from other locations to the place of building, right? I remember my mother was telling me that we are from Ilocos Sur, but the wood for our house, which was constructed in the last quarter of the 19th century, but was renovated in the 1910s, the wood had come all the way from Isabela. So it's hardly any more that concept that you build with whatever is around you. Uh, it's now a concept of building, but you already have a set system for building. You're just going to have to look for the materials, right? So system and then look for the materials. It's not like in traditional architecture where you have both system and materials all in one locality. So again, we go back. Why look back at traditional architecture? I think this was my first slide. I'm just reminding everybody, because we are also talking about identity and cultural manifestations. I think this is the most difficult one, right, to answer. So if you're talking about traditional architecture being a cultural manifestation, how do we assess the health of a particular cultural group then, right? So we can do the research and the documentation. We can do the preservation, but how much preservation can we do actually? Because the question really is it still valid for these communities? So that's the bottom line. So you have, for example, in this slide, a um, a a pair of houses from the northern Philippine highlands, right, from the Cordillera. And one still conserves its traditional roofing, while the other one already has this tile, faux tile um, uh, GI roof. But it's interesting, but because they also develop these slits for air to come out of there, right? So, and it still has a bulul on top. But what is happening? I think it's evolving. It's evolving. There is some kind of pride still there, and this want to preserve, but not preserve everything totally, right? So it's not anymore preserving the traditional manner of creating a roof, but I'll just go to Wilcon and buy buy this, right? Or I'll just go online and order myself a roof of GI that looks like tile. Uh, well, it gets more interesting. Sometimes you do have architectures like these. This is still in the northern Philippine highlands, and you still have that want to produce something that is traditional, but already using materials that are current, right? So in this case, they still wanted to have those slanted walls and that high-pitched roof, and also still have rat guards, right? So very, very interesting. But all of this is integrated into, well, a thoroughly contemporary house. So this is lifted from a web page, and the author had visited Mindanao in 2019, in August of 2019, and wrote this wonderful, wonderful essay on the Torogans of the Maranao Torogans. And part of it just says the sad state of the Torogan, and the photo just says it all, right? So all that's left are these magnificent posts that supported the framing of the entire house. So take a look at what he says here. Honestly, all of the Torogans are in a decrepit condition, feeble, crumbling, and eaten by termites. They stand in abject neglect. So this really talks about how we as people would have uh, this want or the absence of it to preserve our own cultural traditions. Um, for the Torogan, probably, can we say that this is the future? This is a concrete Torogan, right? So all of it is made of concrete. You have no wooden elements. Everything is precast, but it still celebrates that identity, right? And it still celebrates all the color and all the pageantry that is of the Maranao people. And probably I'd like to end the slide with this one. Houses in Sulu, all these floating houses in Sulu, perhaps of the many, many kinds of traditional architectures that we have, this is one that is very consistent. Not the only one, but the one that shows you that everything about about it, the architecture and the entire culture that envelops it, the communities, all of what they do is still pretty much the same, pretty much current. They may have changed their clothes to something that they can buy in the market or something like that, but everything is still very, very valid. So I guess we can end it with that question: Is traditional architecture still valid for us, right, as people, as custodians of this architecture, to be able to move it forward into the future? So I'd like to end with a quote from Hassan Fatih. He was this wonderful Egyptian architect, and he says, "Build your architecture from what is beneath your feet." So maraming salamat po, and I hope you did get something from this. So I guess I'll be entertaining uh, questions if there are any at this point.
Thank you, Architect Mico, for a most informative and very interesting discussion or lecture this afternoon. I love the pictures. Where,
It's
wherever did you get some of them?
architecture. It's the best source.
But
Folk art.
I have the book, but I don't recall seeing the falye with the tin roof or the torogan made of concrete. So
Oh, the Taraga made of concrete is current.
okay.
Yeah.
So, at this point, we would like to, with your indulgence, open the floor for questions from our FB comment section. Um, Currently, I don't know if it's a function of the lecture, pero wala pang questions, sir. We have a comment. We have a comment from our friend and previous speaker, Mr. Lawrence Lasco. He'd like to thank us for the lecture. Maraming salamat sa lecture. His is more of a comment. On our traditional houses being raised from the ground, thus the phrases akyat ng ligaw, panik-panaog, and or in the case of theft, akyat bahay comes to fore. Yun. So just a comment from him.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to begin with one question that's been raised from Ral Perez. How about the future of traditional houses for the masses? I suppose for greater number of people. I did notice that most of the pictures for those made by Manyosa and Encarnacion were really for the more affluent members of society. And what's the future, I think Ral asks, for mass housing or people who are less inclined to source their materials or contract an architect to build
Right.
their homes. Yes.
Thanks, Raymond, for that question, and thank you, Ralph, for raising that. It's very interesting because we are a country that is often visited by all of these storms and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and there's always a need for shelter afterwards, right? So a lot of houses are destroyed, and a lot of people need shelter. So, after Yolanda and after the string of disasters uh, after Yolanda, um, there have been architects that have already looked at more traditional solutions, right? Because most of the solutions rely on concrete or all of these prefabricated houses that can be transported and easily plunked into place, right? But some architects have also produced designs for shelter, for shelters, right? That are based on bamboo. So these you can see, yes. So these you can also see in some of the resettlement areas. I know this for a fact because it was also a project that was done with our chapter in the United Architects of the Philippines. I'm from the Diliman chapter, and hello if there are people from the Diliman chapter listening in. But yes, so there was a working group that was formed, and there was an exploration into bamboo as a material that can be used for producing shelter, right? So this can easily translate into mass housing and such. Another thing is that I don't know if you're familiar with the most recent pavilion of the Philippines or entry of the Philippines, the Venice Biennale.
Yes.
Yes, so
Won
that is
prizes for that.
yes. So that's by Sudarshan Kadka and Frank Furness, right? So
Yes.
that collaboration is something that is coming out of traditional architecture, and it is something that can be replicated anywhere in the Philippine countryside, right? So uh, the future, if there is support for traditional architecture, then there is a future for traditional architecture. Maybe as a suggestion, if also because like a lot of schoolhouses that are used as public schools, no, these are projects by the Department of Public Works and Highways. So if the DPWH can also include in its repertoire, right, more traditional means of constructing, then maybe we can also have that future firmly in place.
Okay. There's a follow-through question from Ral. I did not see it earlier. Do you think it's a valid solution for the housing backlog in the country?
Oh, definitely. It's a very valid solution and something that should be explored because we do see that a lot of the relocation sites are outside Manila. So I have visited some relocation sites in Laguna, and you see them as sort of like row houses, right? Um, and normally, at any given time of day, people are outside because people find the interiors of these new structures to be too warm, too hot. Actually, there's very poor ventilation and very little airflow, and there. So if we can conceptualize something based on traditional architecture, like for example, if you listen to people who promote bamboo architecture like Ning Encarnacion and so many others, uh, they would say that you can actually have a sustainable bamboo forest, and from that bamboo forest you can get your materials to construct and to repair. So you will have something that is sustainable within reach already. So everything is there. It's not like you need to go to Wilcon or to Home Depot or something like that, right? So everything is really just there. So it's really going back to the basics for this one. But at least kasi you keep costs low, 'di ba? Since it's all within reach, carbon footprint is also very low, 'di ba? And everything is very sustainable because what you throw out just goes back to the earth basically. Oh, so maybe it's things like Like, for example, how does it comply with the building code?
Yes.
How will it comply with the plumbing code, with the fire code? So these are things that we can always look at, and maybe we can make it work to the advantage of furthering traditional architecture as a solution.
And if I heard you correctly, one possible champion and also possible source of shout out is perhaps the Department of Public Works and Highways.
Definitely,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay. Thank you. We have a question again. Now naman from Miss Cora. Her question is, has there been a study in the architecture of houses?
Sorry, what house?
Houses, the houses of the ATAs.
There are studies, but very few and unpublished. I have come across some studies, some researches that have research grants that have been given by the NCCA, for example, and also some unpublished theses. Yeah.
Okay. Ma'am Cora will follow through on that request later, or that inquiry later. Okay.
Yeah.
Another question from Phil Chris. Are buildings imitating or adopting the design and character of these traditional buildings? Do they create a legitimacy in design?
Well, I don't.
Take on that.
Yeah, I don't know about legitimacy in design, but remember we were talking earlier about identity also. So it's also a way for design to project one's identity through design, right? So if, for example, you saw that the concrete Ifugao Valley, di ba? If you saw that in concrete, of course you'd always say, I'm sure this person is either from there or is just very much delighted with the architectural forms from there, right? He can associate with it. So it then becomes a medium of expression. Design-wise, well, you can always have a lot of arguments against it, diba? You can always say, but it's impractical. You don't need rat guards anymore. You don't need it doesn't have the wooden walls anymore, right? So it's going to be very hot, and so sobrang daming arguments against it, but it comes out symbolic kasi.
Okay.
Diba? So it is something that comes out to be very symbolic. It's just like, for example, if I recall the Maxis restaurant in Quezon City, the very, very first one, diba? With that very, very discernible roof silhouette, diba?
Yes.
And you're just saying, it doesn't need to have that roof silhouette. It's air conditioned inside already, and I don't need the look of a longhouse because it's a restaurant and so forth and so. But at the end of the day, it's something that projects identity, diba? So if you're talking of design as a means to project one's identity, then it works. It is legitimate.
What's your take on I saw this twice, one in Tagaytay and another one in Pampanga. Resort owners buying the Ifugao Valle in order to create fantasy houses as dorms for their guests, or people who want to spend the night in one as an attraction.
Right. Nako, Raymond, that's been going on for so many,
Yes.
for over like 2-3 decades probably.
Yes.
I now I realize I forgot to include one slide. I forgot to include the slide of people post in front of the Maranao House in Nayong Pilipino,
Okay.
but in the early 1980s, di ba? Because nga parang Nayong Pilipino was meant for us to, di ba, to see at a glance who we are.
Mm.
Diba? Who we are and what our cultural expressions are as Filipinos. No, so what you're saying is something of that sort, but maybe even better, guy, diba? Because what you're saying is actually, I will show somebody the house, but I will not just show the house. I will let them experience being in one, diba? So it then boils down to how authentic the experience will be.
Yes.
First of all, the context is so different. Diba?
Yes.
Baka naka-aircon na yan kasi nasa beach na.
Actually, yung sa Tagaytay, yung sa Pampanga, nilagyan nila ng aircon.
Exactly.
Kasi mainit
Diba?
doon.
Oo. So, ibang-iba na siya. Ibang-iba na yung context, mainit na yung lugar and all of that. So, it strikes you as, sandali lang, maybe there's, parang there's something wrong. But I still got a little bit of a taste, diba,
Yes.
of how it is. Diba? But it doesn't beat like going to the Cordilleras and
Banawe.
actually being in one. Oo.
Yes.
Diba? Because you can actually spend the night in one. There are bed and breakfasts in traditional houses. Siguro the question of translocation na lang will be will be the big question mark ngayon, di ba?
Okay.
Na first of all, this is supposedly protected by law.
Yes.
So there is a law protecting them, and all of these, most of them are over 50 years of age. Therefore, they are protected by law, and you cannot modify, you cannot alter, and you cannot tear them down, let alone, diba, transfer them. So I guess it's the legality, number one. Number two, is it ethical also? Oo. So yung ethics naman, ang mahirap yan sa atin talaga. It's very, very difficult, but it's something that could be raised by the source community.
Okay.
Diba? So sometimes it's the source community that raises the concern, na parang, hey, what are you doing to our symbol? Diba? Because it is a symbol of their culture. And sometimes parang, diba, parang what happens to that symbol? Diba? You use it for something else, and it is just so desecrated. And it loses all value. It may be the same thing physically and materially, but parang the use is so foreign already. Mm-mm.
Would you call that disrespectful?
It's very, very, very disrespectful now. Diba? So yung mga ganon, but sometimes then people will argue na well, it is a way for it to survive. Diba?
Yes. On the other hand,
People will argue about that.
Yes.
Yeah. On the other hand, it is a way for it to survive because people who take interest in them actually put them in their backyards and take care of them along with their other
Yes.
possessions.
Yes.
Diba? So that's another argument. So there are so many arguments in terms of conservation, of preservation, but I think kasi what is important with traditional architecture is that it's not just a relic. Diba? It's not like if I bought a house in Pila, Laguna, and I transferred it somewhere. Diba? Baka magalit yung community and all of that because nabungi yung very nice assemblage of houses. But it's not like parang siguro probably getting a torogan from where it is, diba? Because that has developed for so many hundreds of years, diba? And there's so much meaning that goes into one structure. So when the act of taking it, diba, that simple act of taking it is like, wait a minute, I'm robbing an entire culture.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Yes, oo. Yeah. So iba na yung ano niya, 'di ba? Mag-iiba na yung the way you think, the way you approach these things, 'di ba? When you see them as integral parts of somebody's culture, then there will be that reverence, there will be that respect.
What are your recommendations for adoptions and innovations of these traditional houses to withstand more fierce climates like what we're experiencing nowadays? These traditional houses have already withstood the test of time, but I think they have to be continuously adapting to the more changing times, like it's more hot now weather, to the point that it causes fire, howling winds during a storm, the greater magnitude of the storm. This is from Pedulgulao.
Thank you for the question, ma'am. Actually, if you think about it, I'll give you a story. Maybe it's not about a traditional house, but it's also applicable. When I was doing research on Pawai Church, I encountered some parang correspondences between the Philippine government and a Japanese engineer. And what the Philippine government said, it asked help from UNESCO because they said, we are observing that the facade is buckling out. So it's not it's not straight. It's kind of out of plane, but the facade is buckling out in the center. So nakaganon siya. So sabi nila, well, can we do something? Can we ask an engineer that UNESCO can send? So the engineer goes there, the Japanese engineer, very, very very good reputation. And I read his, I read his recommendations, and he said, parang if I would paraphrase it, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Diba? Meaning to say, that has existed since maybe the 1720s. And it has come to our time looking like this. So if you don't have proof that the buckling out happened just a couple of years ago, don't fix it. This thing we can also apply to this question, no? Na if we see that, for example, the systems of, let's say an Ifugao house, no, fale. Oo. So if the system is still valid after like the passage of so many violent storms across the area, the passage of so many earthquakes in this area, it's still standing, diba? Very few distortions because nga it's a frame, diba? It just adapts. Very, very few distortions. Let's not do anything about it. If it's something that, if for example, you see something wrong, no? I don't know what it can be. Maybe a structural element broke, diba? Kunyari, one of the beams broke, or one of the posts nasira din, no, nag-crack or something. Then that's the time that we enter and we think, okay, what is the best manner for me to approach this, but still respecting the wisdom of traditional construction, diba? Because
Yes.
the last thing that we want to do is to alter that entire system by introducing something foreign. Because when we introduce something foreign, we don't know what the reaction of the rest of the system will be. No? So more often than not, conservators would resort to, for example, splicing the area that was damaged and then replacing it with wood of the same species, or if does not exist anymore, no, that species of wood, you look for an equivalent in terms of the characteristics, no. So when you splice that, then you'll take a look at the appropriate na joineries to be able to put it into place. So there are specific joineries that can answer like stresses like tension or compression. May specific joineries for that. So that will need research also on the part of the conservator. Siguro, if you're also thinking of like building new, diba? Building a new one, maybe you can also think na, yung others naman have been there for quite some time na. So they don't really need to be sort of adapted, or maybe just small tweaks lang with materials, no, but very very small tweaks. I guess the important thing is that we do realize na parang it has gone through a period, a long period of refinement, no, and what we're experiencing now, they have experienced within that long period of refinement. So it's very easy, like for example, yung nakita natin kanina, di ba, that Ifugao house with the GI roof that looks like it's tiles. So if you're looking at that, then it's the easy way out, di ba? It's always the easy way out. I don't want to go through the laborious task of putting together that roof, no, the Kogon roof. I do not want to go through that anymore, diba? One is making the roof, another one is to maintain the roof, another one is to replace the roof. So if I don't want to do that anymore, I'll retain the shape of the roof and get a different material. Diba?
Yes.
One that will last all my life, probably. But one that will also probably keep me baking inside my house because the heat is just radiating into the house. So parang if you really think about it, nako, parang mas na-compromise ko pa yata yung, 'di ba, yung experience of living inside such a home, no? So I may as well go back na lang to using all of those layers of grass, 'di ba, to create my roof and to create something that is for me very comfortable and something that I am used to, 'di ba? Something that keeps the temperature correct. Oh.
Yes, I've seen that kind of roof installed. It's very labor intensive. Saka medyo matagal din sir gawin, no?
That's right. That's right. But you know, if you, for example, if you go to the highland communities in Japan, ganun din eh, 'di ba? So you go to Shiragawa-ko, you go to Gokayama, and you see all of those UNESCO declared na mga thatched houses na parang I don't know how many meters yung kapal ng roof niya, 'di ba? They still maintain it because to them it's a source of pride to be able to still practice, 'di ba, that craft. It's practicing the craft eh. And if you really think about it, the current notions of authenticity, 'di ba, that we have right now, parang the older notions were challenged eh. And we came out with that document from NARA in Japan, di ba? The NARA document on authenticity that challenges the authenticity based on material, di ba? It's not just based on material. It is also based on skill and know-how, di ba? How you can transmit that skill through the ages to be able to still create, di ba, these forms of architecture. So that is what is important.
Thank you, sir. We have another question from Luna Angeles. Good afternoon, sir. you think integrating the techniques used in our vernacular architecture can help mitigate the transmission of COVID-19 if it's integrated when when building modern structures?
Nako, parang epidemiologist yata ang kailangan. Oo. But I don't know about integrating it into new structures. But let me share this to you. The Philippine General Hospital, the original plan of the Philippine General Hospital is based on the pavilion style, no, of hospital planning. And if you think of the pavilion style of hospital planning, it just tells you that it has to be very porous, no, and ventilation should be very good, diba? Because all of the tropical diseases that they knew back then, diba, they would easily be transmitted in enclosed spaces. Yun yung point. So in the last quarter of the 19th century, that was developed, the pavilion style, no? And it was the style that the Americans used for Johns Hopkins, for example, the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and they also used it in their field hospital for the military in Hawaii, diba? And then they used it in the Philippine General Hospital. No, so it's that principle of good ventilation that actually works, diba? So even if you think about it today, diba, they would always say na if you are going to an office, diba, make sure that there are some windows that are open to allow ventilation, diba? Because if not, then all of that COVID will just be circulating around, and everybody's just inhaling it, or diba, it's just going into their eyes or whatever, right? So parang the principle is always to allow for good ventilation, to flush out everything at the first instance.
And this was done with COVID in mind, its adoption. Ganun ba yun, sir?
No. The one of PGH, that's the original plan of PGH.
Okay.
By the Americans.
But it becomes more relevant because COVID requires that there be better ventilation to arrest the spread.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir. We have another question from Chloe Hanopol Cabañas. Traditional architecture, pwede ba ito sa urban areas? Or meron bang requirement sa OBO? I suppose this is Office of the Building.
Office of the Building Officer. Yes.
Needed to build. Thank you.
Yes. That's what we were talking about earlier. So, medyo kailangan i-ayon din natin yung mga structures natin sa sa building code.
Okay.
No? So, we always have to check the building code, the fire code, the plumbing code, and all other codes, the structural code also, diba? So we have to counter check that, because all of these codes are meant for assuring the safety and security of property, diba? So we still have to think about that, no? Maybe as an answer to Chloe, probably we can take inspiration from what we saw, for example, with what Manny Miñana has done. That is, although it's not in an urban setting, I believe the house is in Santa Elena. But increasingly, houses here in Metro Manila would also like to adapt those solutions. No, it's just that there's a space. You're kind of constricted in terms of space, diba? Because let's face it, real estate in Manila is really, really expensive, diba? So when you think about it, parang, oh my gosh, how can I have eaves that are 1.2, 1.5 meters wide? How can I have a garden that can allow for the free flow of air and wind through my house? So it's I think the challenge is also to see how we can adapt it to modern settings, to urban settings. Maybe Chloe, not in terms of material, not so much in terms of material, no, but in terms of the solutions for lighting, solutions for ventilation, diba? Maybe those are the things that we can look at.
Okay. There's a question again from Phil Chris. This is a more practical question following your comments or your response to the last question. Is building traditional houses cheaper than modern ones?
It really depends, as we were talking about earlier, diba? Parang if I want to build a traditional bamboo house, let's say, no, and I am in the middle of Makati, diba? A problem ko is, where's the bamboo? So I will have to source the bamboo somewhere else, diba? And truck everything to Makati, no? So parang sandali lang, ang mahal yata.
Okay.
So it always boils down to that, no? Na parang remember what I flashed towards the end, diba? Parang it's looking at what's beneath your feet, diba? I think that's a good way to see it. Parang looking at your immediate environment, no? You don't have to force, diba? You don't have to force yourself to build a traditional house. Diba? As we were discussing, you can take the ideas of a traditional house and try to work with modern materials, but using those ideas, those philosophies. Diba? But of course, it changes when I'm in the province. So if for example, I go back to Ilocos, I want to stay in the farm or something like that, there's a bamboo grove nearby. And yes, ito pala yung type ng bamboo na pwedeng di ba? Na pwedeng gamitin for building. So if it's the suitable one for building, then probably ang kalaban ko will be time. Di ba? Because I will also have to treat the bamboo.
Yes.
Di ba? So I'll have to go into an entire process of treatment, whether traditional or modern ways of treating bamboo. So may time element pa rin yan. So gastos pa rin siya. But in the end, since all of my materials, diba, most of my materials are just within reach, it becomes cheaper. Diba? So it really depends on the context. Yeah. So sometimes, like for example, okay, I'll give you a tip. Remember yung flooring na pinakita ko kanina, and then the sidings for the for some Ifugao houses, the runo. Diba? So should I say this? Baka wala nang pumunta sa kanya. I'll just say that there is a supplier. There is a supplier in the city. Diba? I won't say na lang where. There's a supplier in the city. And something the size of 2 meters by 3.5 meters of runo would cost me about 2,500 pesos. Diba? I go to Tagaytay, and then I see a supplier there, diba? On the road. And then I ask, how much is 2 by 3.5 meters? And then he will give me a price, 1,900. Uy, mas mura. Diba? But wait, masyadong populated pa rin ang Tagaytay. So, I'll go to Lemery. So, pagdating ko sa Lemery, 900 pesos na lang siya.
Okay.
So, that's just to illustrate.
Yes.
Na it can be expensive depending on where you are.
Yes. Okay. I have experience with Runo. It's cheaper pag lumayo ng Maynila.
Correct.
Really, really cheap. Way out there in the province. Okay. Yes. We have another question from.
If you go to cafe, Pass.
Yun. From Rian Ramos. Good afternoon. Since we are influenced by different architectural styles, what is Filipino architecture for you?
Oh my God.
Oh,
You know, that's that's a long
yes.
debate. And
Discourse
um
of sorts.
uh, yeah, no, my question is, do we even want to go there? No, for me kasi, I'll just say na kasi one of the people who opened my eyes to all of this, I will have to credit is Fernando Zalcita, no, Butch Zalcita, uh, Philippine Ancestral Houses. Yeah, Dr. Zalcita has opened my eyes to most things Filipino, and I like the way he says it, na parang culturally we're all mestizo, 'di ba? But he uses the word mestizo in a Latin American in a Latin American manner
Context.
or in a Spanish manner, because when you say mestizo, you are a mix, 'di ba? You are not pure, 'di ba? You're neither from east or west. You're just a hybrid of so many things, 'di ba? So for him kasi, it's in the acceptance of that hybridity. That's the beauty of it. We have to accept that hybridity to be able to accept what we see around us. 'Di ba? That we are people of the East and the West. So it's strange because 'di ba, when you go to your Southeast Asian neighbors, parang they see you as different. 'Di ba? Manners, it's very different na parang they associate you maybe more with the West, but then when you go to the West, they're like, parang you're still more Eastern in the way
Yes.
that you conceal things, di ba? So parang you don't express everything at once. Meron pa ring factor na kino-conceal mo. My mentor in Mexico, Jorge Loizaga, would always tell me, "You're wearing that Chinese mask again, di ba? You have that Oriental mask. I cannot decipher what you're thinking." Ganon. Because for them, it's very transparent, di ba? Wala. As in, walang filters. Di ba? Ito, filter, mask, ganon. So, it's that hybridity that we have to acknowledge. So, when we acknowledge that, then, for example, something like the bahay na bato, diba, that we were seeing earlier, becomes Filipino automatically, diba? Because it is neither Oriental nor Western. You cannot have a bahay na bato in Madrid. You'll freeze in winter, diba? Even if you say that here you refer to it as a Spanish house, it's not a Spanish house. You'll be frozen. Oh, uh, and then again, parang you're thinking na parang, well, some of the structural solutions are so Western. They're not Oriental, diba? That's what we were discussing earlier. It's post and lintel for the Orientals. For the Westerners, it's post and then there's a truss, diba? There's a roof truss. For bahay na bato, it's always like that, diba? Post, roof truss, tapos may mga beams. So it's really this hybrid already, eh.
Yes.
And then you'll have houses
Hybrid is probably
oh, yeah, you'll have houses of that period na when you look closely at the joinery, they're super Oriental joinery. They're Japanese or Chinese joinery, 'di ba? But all within the context of this hybrid of a house, 'di ba? That uh, the Spanish would always say, "Wow!" They would marvel at the sliding windows of Capiz because that's so foreign to them, 'di ba? So I remember when I still with Escuela Taller before, the Queen of Spain had visited, and one of the moments that we really cherished was when she picked up a piece of Capiz. Diba? So she took it and she was looking at it through. She was parang she got it and she was looking
Hello,
the
sir?
sunlight, no? Oh, ayan, sorry, I'm back. Ayun.
Yes.
So she took a piece of kapis, looking at it against the sunlight. She was saying, "Is this really shell? Diba? Is it really shell?
Mm.
It's something that just is to them so exotic, diba? And when she was shown a panel of a kapis window, she was like, wow, it must be so wonderful, diba? To be engulfed in that soft light, diba? And that will only happen with kapis. It can't happen with paper, diba? It can't happen with glass. It happens with kapis. So it's so unique, diba? But you can still say that it's a hybrid. You can still trace where it's coming from. But the fact that it landed here and the experimentation happened here and the outcome only happened here, then you will say that, oh, yes, it is Filipino because it responds to our needs, diba? To the geography, to everything.
We have a comment from former NCCA chair, Professor De Leon.
Hi, Prof. June.
No, no. He says, traditional architecture is a response to our climate and natural environment and culture of our people. As long as we remain in a watery, earthquake-prone, typhoon-frequented environment, and as long as we remain who we are, many elements of traditional architecture will remain. Yeah. Just a
Well
comment.
said. Thank you, Prof. June. Thank you. Nako, isa pa sa mga idols yan. Oo. Raymond, I'll issue another comment based on that. It was funny one time. I went into my classroom in UST and found a professor of mine, si Ma'am Norma Alarcon, author, of course, of
Yes.
so many books.
Yes.
Yeah. So Ma'am Norma was there, and we were having a very nice conversation. Kasi parang I asked her, I go, Ma'am Norms, would you can you share with us, maybe you're of that age, when air conditioning happened and people shifted to air conditioned spaces within their houses. And you know what she was telling us, na parang you have to realize that, of course, promo rate yung aircon dati. Sabi niya parang halos pinamigay. Ang mura-mura daw niya. Plus, electricity was also very cheap. So, people, syempre, tinangkilik yung pagbili ng aircon. So, what was the result? You don't need those tall spaces anymore, the big spaces, diba, for your rooms, because you can keep yourself cool with this box, diba, that generates cold air, diba? So, but it has to be efficient, diba? And in order for it to be efficient, you have to shrink those spaces. So little by little, our spaces really shrunk to accommodate these air conditioners. Nakakatuwa. I really love that conversation. And yun na nga, di ba? You were saying, Raymond, earlier that somebody had transported an Ifugao house to Pampanga, and it was too hot, plunked in the air conditioner.
Yes.
Diba? So it really is different when you feel everything around you, eh. Diba? Because that's what Professor De Leon is saying, eh, na you have to have an absolute, diba, sense of everything around you and of everything that is happening and could happen. Diba? You can predict it, eh. You can smell a storm coming in. You can feel something. An earthquake is coming probably when you see that the chickens are running wild or something like that, or the dogs kumakahol. Yung ganon. Diba? So, people back then, talagang, they had that keen sense. Diba? And they were talagang connected to their environment. Sort of how it is with that movie Avatar. I don't know if you remember that,
Yes.
diba? Parang they had to connect to their mother tree or something like that. It's an amazing
In
parallelism,
order
but
for it to work.
yeah, it's really something that we have to go back to. Diba? It's plugging into the environment once more.
And there are other questions that are related. Um, this is from Lawrence Sulit. Traditional Filipino architecture uses bamboo or wood as building materials. With the material being fire prone, do you think the use of those materials is still feasible with today's modern design and environment?
I think so. I think so. Given of course you have to look at the fire code also.
Yes. And
Uh,
it's another question from Chris Bordajo.
yeah.
Is it correct that the current building code does not allow the construction of an all-wood building, much to the lament of startups promoting the use of treated bamboo?
Unfortunately, there are impediments. Yes, there are impediments. But okay, going back to that issue of fire, um, it's very interesting because we also have to work on that. Maybe that's something that I have to suggest to the guys down at the NCCA and in the National Historical Commission how to integrate fire protection into our traditional architectures, right? And also, like for example, they have shrines and museums that are all wood, diba? So how do you integrate fire protection there? There are many ways of doing it that are non-intrusive, right? And maybe, just maybe, we can take note of. Remember earlier I was telling you about those thatch houses in the highlands, in the Japanese highlands,
Yes.
in Shirakawa Go and in Gokayama. Um, wow, if you go to Shirakawa Go, they demonstrated it one time. Na they have a fire drill, and the fire drill in the fire drill, most of the fire protection would come from jets from the ground. So they shoot water
Uh,
towards the buildings, no, towards the thatch houses, diba? In order to just soak it in in water. So
yes.
it's something that parang you also need to be very crafty in your solutions. But it
Sensitivity is needed.
yes, yes. Oo. So the response to that is yes, you can of course make traditional houses, traditional buildings, or use traditional methods. But you still have to introduce all of these all of these technologies pa rin.
Okay. Thank you very much for responding to all the questions. If we have some more, we'll probably send them through you, so you can respond to them accordingly. Thank you for responding. I have also several questions, but I can run after you later, I suppose. Final word, sir, to conclude to cap the question and answer portion.
Wow, final words. Para akala ko nag-epilogue na ako dun sa sa presentation. Akala ko yun na yung final words. No, but I think final words would be just to be proud of what you have, 'di ba? So kasi if you're proud with what you have in terms of like what we've been discussing, traditional architecture and all of that, then you will find ways, 'di ba, to either preserve it as they are or preserve the know-how, preserve the knowledge. So in any which way that you want to preserve it, you're still taking from it and transmitting it to the future. So I think that's what's important, 'di ba?
Yes.
It's that transmission into the future. It may be as a whole, it may be in bits and pieces, but for as long as we have that consciousness, 'di ba, to want to bring it to the future, then we will and we can. No? So I guess this is the time that I thank Muscat for
Yes.
for having invited me. And thank you to everybody watching the lecture and fielding in your questions. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the enthusiasm that you show for tradition, for all things traditional, diba? Because this is the base of who we are. No matter what we do, we can't wash it from ourselves, from our skin. This is our skin. So with that, thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
Thank you,
sir.
Raymond. Thank you, Ma'am Cora.
It was a privilege to have you with us this afternoon, sir. At this point, at this juncture, I would like to turn over the virtual floor to Ms. Cora for the concluding section or session this afternoon. Ms. Cora?
Being attuned with the environment, with the ecosystem, has ever been of interest and importance to Muscat. So that listening to Mico share how our Katutubo have responded to the environment and its resources has been a learning experience also for Muscat. Maraming salamat, Mico. To our participants, followers, friends, your virtual presence delights and affirms us. Our heartfelt appreciation to you all. Thank you for being with us. We have more activities even as the year winds up, and we hope to see you during our forthcoming online activities. More lectures, online exhibitions, posts, and podcasts. Muscat continues to celebrate and be proud of Philippine culture. Join us as we do so. Please go to our Facebook page for announcements. Do like us. We are also on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. Meanwhile, stay safe, sane, and healthy. Till the next lecture. Maraming salamat at magandang dapit hapon po sa kanilang lahat.